Okay, now that I got that out of the way, I was going to do a poll, but I'm not. What I want to talk about tonight, and I'm going to be fairly brief with this, is the Baker Act and the Marchman Act. Now, I'm sure everybody has heard of the Baker Act, and that's where you can get someone who's having like a mental health emergency. You can get them help whether they want it or not. Um, to Baker Act someone is to have them involuntarily committed to a mental health stabilization unit, and then they're evaluated for I think it's up to 72 hours. We're going to learn all that today, and decisions are made from there based on those evaluations or whatever. Well, the Baker Act doesn't work for people who have substance abuse issues because that is a whole separate thing. So that's where the Marchman Act comes in, and it's like the Baker Act only for people with alcoholism and addictions. And oh, you know what? Before I start talking, there's one other thing. My browser crashed, and my browser crashed, and so I lost all my tabs. It did this weird thing and kind of just blinked on me, and then when it came back, my tabs were gone. But there was a map that I found that I really wanted to. Okay, I'm trying to get it now. This might be it. Wouldn't be my channel if things didn't glitch out though. Okay. That's not it. Let's go ahead and talk about this, and then I'll see if I can find it towards the end. So we're gonna go over the Baker Act quickly, since we are mostly, for the most part, familiar with that. The Florida Mental Health Act of 1971, commonly known as the Baker Act, allows the involuntary institutionalization and examination of an individual. The Baker Act allows for involuntary examination, what some call emergency or involuntary commitment, which can be initiated by judges, law enforcement officials, physicians, or mental health professionals, and close friends and relatives. There must be evidence that the person, one, possibly has a mental illness, and two, is in danger of becoming a harm to self or harm others, or is self neglectful. So, both of these are defined in the Baker Act. Examinations may last up to 72 hours after the person is deemed medically unable. Medi- Examinations may last up to 72 hours after the person is deemed medically stable and occur in over 100 Florida Department of Children and Families designated receiving facilities statewide. There are many possible outcomes following examination of the patient. This includes the release of the individual to the community or other community placement, a petition for involuntary inpatient placement, also called a civil commitment, involuntary outpatient placement, what some call outpatient commitment or assisted treatment orders, or voluntary treatment. If the person is competent to consent to voluntary treatment and consents to voluntary treatment. The involuntary outpatient placement language in the Baker Act took effect as part of the Baker Act reform in 2005. I'm just going to read these last two paragraphs. The legislation was nicknamed the Baker Act after Florida Democratic State Representative from Miami, Maxine Baker, who served from 1963 to 1972. She had a strong interest in mental health issues, served as chair of the House Committee on Mental Health, and was the sponsor of the bill. Finally, I probably the first uh, representative or congressperson that I've heard of that actually did something worth doing. The nickname has led to the term Baker Act as a transitive verb and Baker acted as a passive voice verb for invoking the act to force an individual's commitment. Through the Baker Act, it is a statute only for the state of Florida. Use of Baker acting as a verb has become prevalent as a slang term for involuntary commitment in other regions of the United States. All right, and I'm going to go through the criteria real quick, and then I'm going to move on to the Marchman Act because that's the one I really want to talk about because most of us really kind of understand the Baker Act. At least we understand it enough to know when to apply it and how to get it applied without having to know all the details. Let's see, criteria for involuntary examination. Specific criteria must be met in order to initiate involuntary examination. Among those criteria are the following elements which do not individually qualify an individual to meet as meeting criteria. Hold on a second, y'all. What's up? Yeah. Okay. Oh, Bubba sleep. Just leave it up. She'll come in here when she wake up through the night. Sorry about that. Little family thing going on. All right, so the criteria is one, reason to believe that the person has a mental illness. Not just saying they're crazy, but reason to believe that a person really has a true mental illness like bipolarism or schizophrenia or some other schizoid uh, issue, PTSD, but you have to have reasonable belief that the person has an actual diagnosable mental health illness, even if you're not able to diagnose them. You're just using your common sense. The person refuses voluntary examination, or in other words, they're not gonna go check themselves in. They're not gonna let you give them a ride to check themselves in. They just don't have any intention of going and getting any help. The person is unable to determine whether examination is necessary. And that's kind of the flip side of the coin. It's not that they're refusing help, but that they are not really in a mental state to understand that that's what they need to do is go get help. I know some people who have mental health issues and they know when they're kind of getting to that point, and so they'll actually go and check themselves in and get help ahead of time because they can feel it coming. But then I also know some other people who have some mental health issues and they're just, let it flow. So, but I do know a couple of people who they keep tabs on themselves and they're really active in caring for themselves with their mental illness, and so they will actually go and check themselves in. They'll tell you in a minute, look, I'm going to lay low for a little while. All right, the decisive criterion, as stated in the statute, mentions a substantial likelihood that without care or treatment, the person will cause serious bodily harm in the near future. Criteria are not met simply because a person has a mental illness, appears to have a mental problem, takes psychiatric medication, has an emotional outburst, or refuses voluntary commitment. So one thing alone is not enough to Baker Act somebody. Furthermore, if there are family members or friends that will help prevent any potential and present threat of substantial harm, the criteria for involuntary examination are also not met. Now that I didn't know. If you have friends or family members and they're steady, let's say you're in a situation and the cops are trying to Baker Act you and you got a cousin, an auntie or whatever standing there with you and they're like, nah, I can keep them from hurting anybody or hurting themselves, then the criteria is not met and you can't be Baker acted at that time because someone is standing there saying that they can help prevent any negative outcomes. The following are not included under this act. Developmental disabilities. So you cannot be Baker acted for uh, being autistic or being educationally challenged or whatever. It has to actually be a mental illness, not just a mental deficiency or mental retardation. Okay, intoxication, drunk, high, not criteria for Baker acting. Conditions manifested only by antisocial behavior. Okay, so a person that wants to stay in their house, not come out, they don't want you visiting, they don't want to talk to you on the phone, they ain't trying to message on Facebook. That in itself, them wanting to be alone and not socialize or interact with people is not enough to Baker Act them. Conditions manifested only by substance abuse impairment. If the only reason the person is doing what they're doing is because they're drunk or high, Baker Act does not apply there. So if the person that is always cool, calm, and collected, and then as soon as they take a sip of liquor, or as soon as they take a puff, a shot, or whatever it is they do, they start acting all kinds of anyway, that in itself is not enough for Baker Act. Substantial likelihood must involve evidence of recent behavior to justify the substantial likelihood of serious bodily harm in the near future. Moments in the past when an individual may have considered harming themselves or another do not qualify the individual as meeting the criteria. So you can't use the fact that the person said 2 years ago, I'm going to do this, that, or the other thing, or that they were behaving in a certain way 2 or 3 years ago. It has to be based on present, what's going on right now, and what's likely to stem from this incident. So that is the Baker Act. The Baker Act is for mental health. Now the Marchman Act, and this is another Florida law, so it's called the Marchman Act in Florida. But as I read it, you may think of what it is, what it's called in your area, in your state. And if you do, please drop it in the comments so that just for awareness, so that I and other people can know what it's called in other areas. What do they call the Marchman Act in Texas, in California, in New York, whatever. Um, but yeah, so now we're moving over to the Marchman Act, and the Marchman Act is like the substance abuse side of the Baker Act. You got a heads and tails coin. You got the substance abuse on one side and Baker Act on the other side. All right, so the involuntary categories and criteria. The involuntary assessment. Actually, let me read the first part first. The Marchman Act, officially the Hal S. Marchman Alcohol and Other Drug Services Act of 1993, is a Florida law that provides a means of involuntary and voluntary assessment and stabilization and treatment of a person allegedly abusing alcohol or drugs. The involuntary assessment and treatment has two categories: non-court and court-involved admissions. So we got two ways that the Baker Act assessment and treatment can come about. I'm trying to say the Marchman Act assessment and treatment can come about. And that's pretty black and white. Court meaning a judge ordered it, and non-court meaning no judge had anything to do with it. The criteria for involuntary admission is there is good faith reason to believe the person is substance abuse impaired, and because of such impairment, one has lost the power of self-control with respect to substance use, and either 2A is has inflicted or threatened or attempted to inflict, or unless admittedly is likely to inflict physical harm on himself or herself or another, or either that, or B is in need of substance abuse services, and by reason of substance abuse impairment, his or her judgment has been so impaired that the person is incapable of appreciating his or her need for such services and making a rational decision in regard thereto. However, mere refusal to receive such service does not constitute evidence of lack of judgment with respect to his or her need for services. Or in other words, just because they refuse to go get help doesn't mean that they are refusing because they're high, because they're impaired. Because remember, up here it says has lost the power of self-control with respect to substances, to substance use, or in other words, they're high off their rocker and they couldn't make a good decision if you put it in their lap. So just because a person says no doesn't mean that they're incapable of or they need it forced upon them. All right. Let's talk about the procedure for it. The procedure: one, a sworn affidavit is signed at the local courthouse or clerk's office. Two, a hearing is set before the court after a petition for involuntary assessment and stabilization is filed. Three, following the hearing, the individual is held for up to 5 days for medical stabilization and assessment. Four, a petition for treatment must be filed with the court and a second hearing is held for the court to review the assessment. Five, based on the assessment and the recommendation that the individual needs extended help, the judge can then order a 60-day treatment period with a possible 90-day extension if necessary. Six, if the addict exists treat, if the addict exits treatment in violation of the judge's order, the addict must return to court and answer to the court as to why they did not comply with treatment. Then the individual is required immediately then the individual is required to return immediately to voluntary care. If the addict refuses, they are held in civil contempt of court for not following treatment order and are ordered to either return to treatment or be incarcerated. So there's a process for that. First, someone has to make that petition. I'm kind of familiar with this because I had a family member once that there was discussion about doing a Marchman Act on them. So first, you file the petition. You go down to your county courthouse or your local clerk of court's office, whichever office it is that takes paper. It's down at our county courthouse, the district courthouse, and you fill out a petition to have someone committed. Just for the sake of easier speech, I'm going to say we're talking about my sister. I would go down to my local courthouse, file the petition saying that basically my sister is incapable because of her drug and alcohol use of being able to make good decisions, to care for herself, and I fear that she may harm herself or someone else because of her use of substances. Okay, after I do that, then a hearing is set in front of the court so that they can evaluate my petition and the judge will decide, yes, this petition is valid and we need to go ahead and put your sister into some type of treatment, or no, you haven't met the criteria and we're going to leave your sister alone. Following the hearing, the individual is held for up to 5 days for medical stabilization and assessment. Now, provided that the judge says, okay, she needs to be committed, then she can be held for up to 5 days while they try to get her stabilized, get her to come down and attend to any kind of medical issues that she might be having, blah, blah, blah. Four, a petition for treatment must be filed with the court and a second hearing is held for the court to review the assessment. Okay, so after my sister is assessed and stabilized, then there's another petition that's going to be filed so that we can go back and have another hearing and the judge can look over the assessment and I'm assuming he's also going to look over like how far this person has progressed in their treatment because that might be applicable. Five, based on the assessment and the recommendation of the individual needs extended help, the judge can then order a 60-day treatment period with a possible 90-day extension. So basically, once he decides, let's say the judge decides that the petition should stand, that this person does need help, and as a matter of fact, they need more than 5 days help, then he extends it out and can extend it out as much as 90 days. And if the addict exits treatment in violation of the judge's order. So a lot of rehabs are not locked down from the facilities. There's not 8-foot fences with barbed wire across the top and locked doors everywhere. You can walk out at any time that you please in most of those situations. So I've heard. I don't have first-hand experience with it. So if a person should decide that, hey, I'm done with this, I'm going to do whatever it is I'm going to do, and they walk out of that facility, then they have to go back to court and face the judge about why they refused to participate or why they left the treatment or whatever. All right, and it says if the addict refuses and they're held in contempt of court for not following treatment orders and can be ordered to either return or be incarcerated. So basically, we all know what contempt of court is. The judge told you to do something, you didn't do it. He decides that you're in contempt of court, finds you guilty, tosses your butt in the county jail for however long, 30 days, 2 months, whatever. So if this person had left the facility and decided they didn't want to go along with the treatment, then that would be in direct violation of the judge's order because the judge's order was for them to enroll in and abide by this treatment. So at that point, the judge has the option to tell them, hey, look, get back over here, go to the program and get it together, or go sit it out in county jail, one of the two. And that is it. So the Baker Act is for mental health. The Marchman Act is for substance abuse, alcohol and substance abuse. Now, before I before I get off here, I want to try to see this real quick. If I can just remember the search term, I can find it really easily. Because out of all 50 states, there are only like 14 states that don't have some type of mandatory treatment laws on the books. And I found it. Finish loading. I knew I could find it. Get it to open right over here. Okay, so let me share this tab. Tab of that. Show me. Okay, so here we have this map. Now, all the yellow that you see are states that have both involuntary commitment laws for substance abuse disorder and alcohol. Okay, wait. Yellow is the states that have involuntary commitment laws for substance use disorder and alcoholism. The green, which is just that one state up in New England, Vermont. Vermont is the only of our states with involuntary commitment laws for substance use disorders only, meaning that you can use that Marchman Act type thing to get um, someone who's using drugs committed, but not someone who is only alcoholic. The blue state, Montana, has involuntary commitment laws for alcoholism only. So you could force someone into treatment for their alcoholism, but not for their substance abuse issues. So, and there's the map. Oh wait, and what is this one here? Rhode Island. Rhode Island and Montana. You can force someone to get treatment for alcoholism, but not substance abuse. And that is the Baker Act and the Marchman Act. Um, so if you ever find yourself in need to get someone some help and they don't fit the criteria for the Baker Act, at least now you have this information about the Marchman Act or whatever it may be called in your area because it's called different things in different areas. Hold on, I thought they had a list of what it was called, but I guess they don't. But ow, hold on, I'm looking real quick. I'm at the bottom of Baker Act. I know I saw it. Yeah, okay. So in some places, you've got Kendra's Law, you've got Laura's Law, you've got the 5150 out of California. So I don't know exactly what it's called in your state, but you can find out. If you ever need to Marchman act someone, you already know, go down to the courthouse. I don't go down there and call it the Marchman Act unless you're in Florida because they might not know what you're talking about, but explain to them what it is that you need and they should be able to help you with that. It was actually a police officer who told me about the Marchman Act in the time that we were dealing with that issue with a family member, and we were trying to get them some help. So you got resources out there. You have some ways to support and help your loved ones with both mental health issues and substance abuse issues. And sometimes it takes that kind of tough love. Like, I ain't gonna lie, if I had known that my brother was as bad off on drugs as he was, I would have definitely made my way there, walking, running, or riding, and Marchman acted him. I would have done that for him because I love my brother and the life that he led. He ended up taking his life away. So if you know someone, if you hang out with someone and you care about them, your spouse, your children, your other family members, your good friends, people you consider good friends or close friends, if they need help, by all means, even if they're going to be mad at you for a little while, get them the help, whether they want it or not, because it really could be the difference between life and death. It really could. I mean, you could be sitting there talking to that person 1 minute and 5 minutes later getting a call that they're dead from an overdose. It can happen just that quickly. Or they've done some, they just flipped out mentally and committed some horrible act. So the Baker Act and the Marshall Act are just tools to put in your own toolbox. And I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.